I knew it was coming the second I saw his smirk, that smug little half grin he'd perfected after a decade of dodging responsibility and calling it leadership. He leaned back in his chair like he was about to deliver a TED talk, not gut my career. The man actually swirled his coffee like a Bond villain. "I need solutions, not problems," he said, and then slid the termination letter across his desk like it was a party invitation. I didn't flinch, just looked at it. Final paycheck stapled to the top like some kind of bonus prize for keeping my mouth shut until the end. Immediate release. No warning, no exit interview, no thanks for the 12 years I spent fixing the exact kind of messes he pretended to lead us through. Just a folder, a shrug, and a line about toxicity in the workplace. Because that's what calling out vendor fraud counts as now, being negative. Before I continue, if this kind of story hits you, take 2 seconds to like the video and subscribe. 97% of people don't, and it really helps the team keep bringing you these insane real-life twists. All right, back to it. 2 weeks before that ambush of a review, I'd flagged a very real, very expensive compliance gap in one of our most critical vendor contracts, a clause that didn't get signed, a liability cap missing initials, and an entire Appendix F, mind you, completely omitted from the digital record. I drafted a detailed report, cited every timestamp, cross-referenced vendor comms, and uploaded it to the shared drive under the folder labeled Urgent, Q4 Risk. The kind of report that keeps people out of orange jumpsuits. Apparently, that made me a threat. Not to the company, but to his image. And you don't mess with the image, especially not in Q4. Especially not when the board is circling and bonuses are being divvied up like candy at a funeral. I remember standing up and adjusting my cardigan like it was armor. Didn't say a word. Didn't give him the pleasure of seeing me flinch. He was already looking past me, eyes on his laptop like I'd disappeared the second he handed me the letter. I stepped out, walked through the office one last time, past the interns I'd trained, past the glass-walled war room I'd practically lived in during the last 3 product launches, past the whiteboard with my handwriting still visible beneath 3 layers of ignored strategy notes. Nobody looked up. They never do when the ship's captain tosses someone overboard. Makes it easier to pretend you won't be next. I walked straight to my car, locked the door, and sat in silence. No crying, no yelling, just stillness, the kind that wraps around you when the betrayal is too heavy for emotions to float. And then I smiled. Because 2 weeks ago at an industry mixer, I'd said something interesting over drinks, something that landed better than I realized. And now, well, now someone else was about to read a report their biggest rival chose to ignore. It was 6:07 a.m. when the ping hit my phone. My eyes were still adjusting to the dull gray light leaking through the blinds when I opened the message and saw the subject line. Follow up on your Q4 insight. Lathan Systems. Beneath it, a first-class e-ticket. Columbus to San Francisco. Departure, 9:10 a.m., same day. Attached was a PDF outlining a 3-month consulting contract, 6 figures, flexible terms. No NDAs yet. Just one line in the body of the email. Come explain the risk to our board. I hadn't applied. I hadn't reached out. All I'd done was speak honestly at a cocktail table 2 weeks prior, bourbon in hand, about how Appendix F had somehow vanished from the final vendor package. That alone had been enough to make the man across from me raise both eyebrows and pull out his phone. Say that again, he'd murmured, thumbing something into his notes. We didn't talk long after that, just exchanged cards and moved on. I hadn't expected anything to come of it. At best, I figured I'd get a polite LinkedIn request and maybe a let's stay in touch. What I got instead was a parachute lined with gold and an implicit invitation to dismantle the machine that had just spit me out. I packed one bag, black roller, scuffed near the handle, same one I used during product roadshows. Tossed in 2 suits, laptop, heels, and the flash drive I always kept separate from company equipment. The one labeled Backup Personal Projects. It wasn't anything illegal, just notes, frameworks, conversations I wasn't supposed to screenshot but did anyway. A tidy little library of negligence, all time-stamped and cross-referenced with calendar entries. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was curious. Curious what the board of their biggest competitor already suspected. As the Uber pulled up, I opened my laptop and scrolled through old messages. Red flags I'd raised, brushed off by legal with "will escalate if necessary," ignored by procurement because it's already been approved, and buried by my boss under a pile of buzzwords and ego. Every one of those messages was now a breadcrumb. And someone finally wanted to follow the trail. By the time we were in the air, I was reviewing their last public earnings call. Lathan had hinted at structural reforms. They weren't bluffing. And I wasn't just a disposable cog anymore. I was a scalpel. I landed at SFO at 11:32 a.m., was met at the gate by a driver holding a sign with my name spelled perfectly, and was driven straight to an office suite downtown that looked like it was carved out of clean glass and pure silence. The kind of place where people didn't say, "Let's circle back." They just made decisions. A tall woman in a navy sheath dress handed me a security badge and a bottle of still water with a black label I couldn't pronounce. "They're ready whenever you are," she said. I wasn't nervous, just steady, focused. The first time in years I felt like what I said might actually matter. And when the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, I realized something that made me smile. This wasn't a second chance. It was my first one, finally offered by people smart enough to listen. The lights dimmed and the conference room quieted in that way only money can buy. Thick glass walls, double insulated, no outside sound, no distractions. Just 11 people in tailored suits staring at a woman in heels who used to sit in a cubicle next to the microwave, waiting for her lean cuisine to finish while her ideas got ignored. I didn't open with my story. I didn't mention the smirk, the folder, the phrase that had clung to me like mildew. Too negative. Instead, I started where they'd care. Slide 3. Vendor fraud and liability exposure. Q4 overview. A few polite nods. One brow lift from the woman at the end of the table. Then I clicked through. Here you'll see the redacted email chain between account managers and legal. Notice the timestamp. December 5th, 3 days after the initial report was uploaded and marked as pending review. Now look here. Same day, the final vendor agreement was submitted to finance. No signature on the amended clause, no initials on the revised payment schedule, and yet it went through. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pace, just clicked, explained, and clicked again. Now, let's jump to the risk profile. I advanced the slide. This particular vendor, Sallard Integrated, is currently facing litigation in Ontario Superior Court for breach of similar contract terms. That case was filed 4 months ago. Our internal team did not disclose that during onboarding. In fact, the conflict of interest box was marked NA. Here's the clause that got them in trouble there, almost identical to the one we failed to execute here. I paused. Let the silence fill the room. CFO leaned back. The man to his left swiveled his pen in slow circles. Finally, the CFO looked at me. "Is this why you were fired?" I shrugged. Not sarcastically. Just the honest kind. The kind that says, you already know the answer. "We had reason to believe there were irregularities," the COO admitted quietly. "But this—" She didn't finish. I continued. "By my analysis, if Sallard defaults, or if this comes under regulatory review, you're looking at up to $18.4 million in invalidated contracts. That includes at least one active federal agreement where this vendor is a sub, which exposes your audit trail. If someone pulls thread B, thread A comes out with it, and right now your competition hasn't even buttoned the coat." A younger board member leaned in. "Why didn't your team act on this?" "My team did. My boss didn't." Silence again. Then the board chair asked, "So what would it take to capitalize on this?" I looked at her, squarely, not gloating, not vengeful, just focused. "You already are. You invited me here." I watched their faces shift, not in panic, not in scandalized surprise, but in that controlled calculation people wear when they realize a weapon's been dropped gently into their lap. And they're not the ones it's pointed at. The mood in the room shifted from clinical analysis to something far more dangerous. Possibility. You could feel it in the way the CFO crossed his arms and leaned back, not out of dismissal, but calculation. In the way the board chair stopped clicking her pen. One of them whispered something to the general counsel, who nodded once and pulled out a tablet. "We're not interested in competing," she said finally. "Not anymore. If the foundation's this cracked, we'd rather own the debris." They didn't want a lawsuit. They didn't want to poach a client. They wanted to own the whole brittle skeleton before it collapsed completely and make damn sure it never resurrected under someone else. The chair looked directly at me. Would they even sell? I let the faintest smile touch my face. Not smug. Surgical. Not to you, but maybe to someone who used to refill the coffee pot, sit through the town halls, who knows the building layout by heart and still has a badge they forgot to deactivate. And just like that, the reverse pitch wasn't coming from them. It was coming from me. By the end of the day, we'd booked a law firm, not Lathans. A shell entity would make the initial approach. Citrine Advisory Group, a quiet, unassuming LLC formed 6 months ago for capital portfolio opportunities. It was dormant. Now it had a purpose. They'd fund it. I'd be its voice. The offer wasn't aggressive. $3.8 million total. Low, but not insulting. Enough to make a panicked board feel like they were negotiating from strength. Just enough to make it seem like an escape hatch instead of a coffin lid. Every line of the offer had my fingerprints on it. Every clause tailored to avoid raising alarms. A 6-month transition clause with optional advisory rollovers, liquidation buffers disguised as consulting continuity guarantees. It read like a soft landing deal. It wasn't. It was a scalpel, coated in sugar. No one asked me if I had reservations. They knew I didn't. Not because I was vengeful, but because I understood systems. When a system shows you what it rewards, you don't whine. You take notes, and when it breaks, you don't cry over your severance. You build the vacuum that comes next. The beauty of it was, I could do all this and never once violate a damn thing. My severance didn't include non-solicitation, no non-compete, no clawbacks, just a gag order about internal HR matters and a confidentiality clause about financial disclosures. But this was me operating outside their frame entirely. I wasn't coming back for a job. I wasn't hunting a paycheck. I was being handed the script to their funeral and asked if I'd like to read it aloud. And God help me, I didn't even need to change the ending. He laughed. I heard about it secondhand, from someone in accounting who still hadn't figured out I was no longer legally restricted from talking shop. She said he read the offer letter out loud, practically shouted it across the executive floor like it was a joke. 3.8? He snorted. What is this, a prank from procurement? He crumpled the letter theatrically and tossed it toward the trash. Missed. Didn't pick it up. But then the phone rang. Not his assistant's. 2 minutes later, it was his. Their primary lender wanted clarification. Had they resolved the Q4 vendor compliance issue? Specifically, the discrepancy listed under contingency liability, Q4 TBD, because someone had flagged it during a cross-reference of deferred payouts and risk exposure. That someone wasn't me. That someone worked for the bank. Suddenly, the letter from Citrine wasn't so funny. I wasn't there, obviously, but I know the exact moment the laughter died. I imagine it happened as soon as he realized he'd never seen a Q4 compliance memo. Not because it didn't exist, but because he'd buried it, filed it away with all the other negativity I was apparently too good at recognizing. The board convened an emergency call that afternoon. Again, I wasn't invited, but you'd be amazed how many people love to forward meeting links to a former colleague out of habit. No cameras on, just voices, tense, clipped. We need to address the offer seriously. It's absurdly low. Not if they know what the bank knows. Silence. Do we know what the bank knows? More silence. And then a voice I recognized, Trina, General Counsel. There's a draft memo, yes, uploaded by Redacted, not yet reviewed, time-stamped October 9th. Someone asked what was in it. Trina. Liability risk, contract exposure, unexecuted addenda, vendor litigation cross-flagged from Ontario. Another pause. Longer this time. I didn't smile. Not really. There's no joy in watching a building you helped design catch fire. But there is stillness. A kind of quiet that comes from knowing you tried to warn them, and they called your warning a character flaw. Citrine Advisory sent a follow-up email 2 days later. Professional. Cordial. We're prepared to discuss potential transition terms should circumstances change. A sentence designed to say everything while revealing nothing. I reviewed it before it went out. Added one line, just above the closing. We're aware of the pending audit triggers and are prepared to expedite due diligence. It wasn't a threat. It was a clock. The best part? That line item, Contingency liability, Q4 TBD, had been sitting in the internal budget since September. I didn't put it there. Finance did. All I ever did was give it context. Now that context was spreading. By Friday, at least 2 middle managers had called in sick. Another had taken a personal leave with no return date. Legal was circling like a pack of wolves pretending to be sheep. And my ex-boss? He hadn't responded to the follow-up letter, but the trash can still had the original offer in it. I know. Someone finally picked it up and scanned it into the board records archive. It's funny, the things they choose to keep once the burning starts. It didn't end with an explosion. It ended the way most collapses do, quietly, under fluorescent lights in a conference room with stale coffee and too many open laptops. 2 weeks. That's how long it took from Citrine's second offer to the signing of the deal. The board went dark for most of it. No internal memos, no company-wide statements. Just silence that buzzed louder with each passing day. Employees started whispering phrases like potential restructuring and strategic opportunity. HR canceled all open positions. Slack channels fell oddly quiet. Meanwhile, the routine audit they'd all forgotten about finally came due. Nothing flashy. Just a cycle check from the Office of Procurement Integrity, one that required matching vendor contracts against federal reporting forms. No one thought twice about it, until someone did. One flagged clause, one missing page, one vendor showing up in both a Canadian court docket and a U.S. government database. And just like that, the inquiry ballooned. The audit team requested full access to Q3 and Q4 documentation. Legal was looped in, external counsel activated, and all the while I waited. They didn't want to sell. Of course they didn't. But they weren't in a position to refuse, not when their lender froze the second tranche of funding, not when the auditors requested 3 years of backlogs, not when half the board suddenly remembered the memo they never opened. The chair, finally out of patience, called Citrine's bluff, except it wasn't a bluff. We had the offer ready. All it needed was a timestamp. The final price, $3.8 million, asset only, no equity rollover, no retention bonuses, transition terms reduced to 30 days. It was, effectively, a mercy acquisition, a parenthetical in the corporate obituary pages. I was in the room when the papers were signed, on Citrine's side of the table, of course. My hair was pinned up. Navy blazer, no jewelry, just the badge clipped to my lapel. Integration consultant, CAG. They never said my name aloud, but they all recognized me. My old boss wasn't there. He'd been relieved of duties earlier that week, effective immediately. No public send-off, no farewell lunch. The same man who'd told me I was too negative to lead had been escorted out before the new leadership even entered the building. I didn't flinch when his name came up. Just turned the page in my binder to Clause 18B, ran my finger along the line, and nodded at legal. Key insights provided under indemnified disclosure by third-party consultant. My insight, my clause, my fingerprint on the contract that gutted the place he used to run. When the final signatures were inked, the board chair turned to me. "You'll have full authority on transition strategy." I nodded once, not smug, just ready. Because now came the real part, the one I'd been preparing for while they thought I was just another woman who took notes and smiled through meetings. Now I wasn't part of the system they ignored. Now I was the system. The same airport, the same terminal, the same gate, but this time no nervous energy, no wondering who would listen or whether I belonged. First class again, but not as a guest, as an emissary. I didn't touch the champagne. I was too focused on the folder in my lap. It wasn't thick, just a few pages, a revised organizational chart, 3 transition notices, and a preliminary exit plan for legacy leadership. His name was on the list. Of course it was. That part wasn't my call. The numbers made the decision long before anyone put ink to paper. I arrived before noon and was met by a black car with tinted windows and leather seats that still smelled new. The driver didn't make conversation. He knew better. When we pulled up to the old building, the one I used to unlock with a key card they never asked me to return, I didn't hesitate, just stepped out, heels clicking on the concrete like punctuation marks. Inside, the lobby looked the same. Polished floors, abstract art on the walls, silence only broken by the occasional ding of an elevator. But this time, I didn't badge in. I didn't check in at the desk. The receptionist rose before I reached her. "Right this way, Ms. Fallon," she said, already reaching for a pass labeled Visitor in gold. Except this one had a sub-label in bold type. Integration Consultant, Citrine Advisory Group. A man in a navy blazer met me at the elevator, head of operations, recently promoted. He didn't pretend to be casual, just led me through the same corridors I used to walk like a ghost. Only now, eyes followed me for a different reason. Recognition, realization, and something else, respect, maybe, or fear. It was hard to tell. Both emotions wear similar masks when a hierarchy flips. And then I saw him. Across the atrium, half shielded by the frosted glass of Conference Room B, he was standing by the table, talking to someone with a clipboard. He turned, locked eyes with me, paused, paled. I didn't stop walking. The elevator opened. The door guard nodded. I stepped inside and faced forward, just as he started to move toward me. Too late. On the 14th floor, a suite had been cleared. My nameplate was already mounted on the desk. Special Advisor. Acquisition Transition Office. Not temporary. Not honorary. Permanent glass, etched metal, no plastic. I unpacked my laptop, plugged it in, opened the portal, and reviewed the implementation queue. 3 departments flagged for optimization. 5 roles under review. His was one of them. A ping came through. Meeting request. From his address. Subject line, quick sync. I stared at it for a few seconds, then clicked accept. 15 minutes. Let him sweat. He walked in like it was still his office. Same swagger, same half-button shirt under a blazer he never quite fit. The irony didn't escape me. He even sat in the same chair he'd fired me from, like muscle memory was stronger than shame. "Guess you found your solution after all," he said, forcing a grin like we were old colleagues sharing a drink, not 2 people on opposite ends of a power shift he didn't see coming until the ink was dry. I didn't smile, didn't blink, just opened the folder on the desk between us and turned it so he could read it. He glanced down, then back at me. The smile faltered. "No," I said evenly. "You found the solution. You just didn't like what it looked like." He leaned back, crossed his arms, classic deflection stance. "I mean, look, I know things got heated, but I've always believed in continuity. Culture matters, right? I could stay on, help the new team, keep the transition smooth." He actually said transition like it was his idea, like I hadn't been the one building the bridge while he was too busy burning every rope behind him. I slid the severance packet across the table, neatly paperclipped, highlighted sections already tabbed. "Immediate transition," I said. He didn't reach for it. "You're serious?" I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't think we'd keep the person responsible for bearing a compliance memo, did you?" His jaw tensed. I pulled a second page from the folder and placed it gently on top. "You'll recognize this." He looked down. His original termination memo, the one he gave me. Same font, same tone, same clipped language about negativity and misalignment. Only now it had one small difference. My signature at the bottom, as receiving officer. I watched him read it. Watched the blood drain just enough to make the tan fade from his face. No words. Just silence. The kind that comes when you realize the narrative flipped and you were the footnote all along. I stood, closed the folder, smoothed the lapel of my blazer. "Security will walk you out. Your belongings have already been packed. The company laptop's been wiped. Exit email goes out at 3 EDOWs. He didn't move, didn't speak. "I suggest you use this time to prepare your own story," I added, voice level, "because after 3's hour, it won't be yours anymore." And then I left him sitting there, in that chair he thought would always be his, with a severance packet in one hand and his own memo staring back at him from the other. The boardroom smelled like new carpet and paper that hadn't been touched by panic. The nameplates were different now. Half of them new hires, the other half quietly retained because they'd known when to stay silent, when to listen. No more sycophants, no more echo chamber. Just people ready to build something that wouldn't collapse the second someone asked a hard question. I stood at the head of the table, tablet in hand, walking the team through the last phase of transition. 3 vendor relationships, terminated. 2 pending, under review. New risk protocols were in place, drafted with the same frameworks I'd once been criticized for overthinking. The advisory wing had a new name, new scope, New mission, prevention over reaction. We'd made the pivot in less than 30 days. No one asked how we did it so fast. They already knew the answer. We stopped pretending problems were personal. The new CFO, smart, quiet, lethal with a spreadsheet, nodded when I finished presenting the Q1 roadmap. "This is clean," she said, "not just efficient, durable." Someone else asked about external messaging. I deferred to the new head of communications. He understood the tone we were going for. Grounded, accountable, forward-facing. No need to spin a failure, just show how we move through it. We adjourned before noon. On the way out, a junior analyst, young, sharp, and probably smarter than I was at her age, caught up with me near the elevator. "Do you regret how it ended?" she asked, eyes wide with that kind of curiosity that's not nosy, just honest. I paused, looked past her, out the window at the city I used to walk through, wondering if I'd ever feel like I belonged. Then I looked back. "No," I said. "I regret they thought it was just a problem." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully get it yet. Maybe she will one day. Back in my office, I pulled up the new onboarding portal. Compliance training module was already live. Slide 3 opened with a familiar title, Vendor Fraud and Liability Exposure, Q4 Overview. Same deck, same structure, new colors, new branding, but the bones were mine. The case study was no longer hypothetical. It was company history. At the bottom of the last page, just below the final bullet, the training closed with a single line. Solutions begin where denial ends. And this time, nobody rolled their eyes.